book review. What a terrible font. That V looks like a lowercase b. But anyways, once again there will be gossip about books and I will judge everything even though no one asked me to. By the way, you have to see this quick preview of the Library of Congress. I visited the Washington, D.C. area close to about a year ago now, and personally, I really enjoy this type of architecture, and I love going to museums and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, I stopped by also the Botanical Gardens, Supreme Court, and National Air and Space Museum. So, of course, I will include more photos from that trip as well. I'll just place that at the end of this video. At the Library of Congress, to my surprise, I happened to have recognized one book on their shelves. It was from a previous book review on this channel, and it was the Great Ideas one. So that made me feel like I wasn't too out of place in this palace. Well, enough of this side rant, and here we go! Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. I remember when this book first came out a while ago, and I've had my eyes on it for a while. But it took me so long to get around to it, mainly because, well, just look at this brick of paper. Well, that's not too practical for me to carry around every day. And it's hardcover. Look at this punk. What a great picture. And I liked typing on the Macintosh, especially the keyboard was so satisfying to work on. This is how I like to read, and why libraries would hate me, and why I tend to buy most of my books. I was always fascinated and definitely inspired by Steve Jobs in many ways. This was my first time reading a book by Walter Isaacson, and I was very impressed and entertained by his ability to capture people's personalities so well and their moments in life. I didn't even expect to be so amused from this book as well. Most biographies for me, well, so far, have tended to get drawn out here and there, and overall they get kind of boring for me. Not always because the subject person had a boring life, though in some cases that may be true, but I think it also takes a talented author to express their life in a way that makes the story worth learning about. And now, I may look out for this author's name in the future. I could go pretty long about this book, but here are just a few of my favorite lines from this read. To create a new standard takes not just making something that's a little bit different, it takes something that's really new and captures people's imagination. The best innovation is sometimes the company, the way you organize a company. At most other companies, engineering tends to drive the design. For Jobs, the process tended to work the other way. Often that would mean really pushing and challenging engineers, sometimes even driving them mad. What does it take to do what has never been done before? And I thought I'd just throw it out there. This author included the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I enjoyed reading all of it. And for those of you who have read this book, tell me what you think about his reality distortion field. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, next one I want to talk about is The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference by Malcolm Gladwell. This was actually the second time I read this book. I tend to reread books and revisit them. That's also why I tend to highlight and mark them, because when I reread something, different things tend to stand out differently to me. So, to summarize the fascinating theme of this book, I'll just name a couple of my favorite lines here. Ideas and products and messages and behaviors spread just like viruses do. Social change is so volatile and so often inexplicable because it is the nature of all of us to be volatile and inexplicable. Look at the world around you. It may seem like an immovable, implacable place. It is not. With the slightest push in just the right place, it can be tipped. I found this concept to be so interesting and refreshing for me, I think I'll read this book for a third time this year. You may have seen this book before because it's heavily marketed and still in the popular areas of many bookstores and spoken about a lot. The 48 Laws of Power. I don't like the sound of the title. To write laws of anything, it feels a little bit pompous for me. The cover is very garish in its color, but I can see why this book has been pretty popular and successful nonetheless. As you can see here, check out this odd formatting. You can see how some of the text is arranged to form some various shapes throughout the page, and I thought that just was so cluttered like this. And anyways, it wasn't unbearable, but I just thought it was just cluttered to read here and there and with a lot of side notes on the edges of the pages. But overall, there were several bits of wisdom and good stories and narratives to illustrate what they were kind of going for was laws of human nature, I'd say, which is a strong prevailing pattern in us. So I think that's where the laws statement was coming from, and that makes sense. It's kind of justified there, I think. So I'd say this is a book with a very bold title and a very bold and bright cover, and inside it is a lot of good tips and advice. Here are some of my favorite quotes from this one. How often we put ourselves down by asking for too little. I have certainly been guilty of this habit. The aggressive person is rarely in full control. Don't mistake aggressive action for effective action. It is the power of being able to overcome the natural human tendency to react to things as they happen. Not bad for a book that I don't like its title and its ugly cover, but I will keep on reading and probably pick up another one from this author since I think I learned a couple things. The author is Robert Greene, and he has a couple of interesting conversations and interviews on the internet. The next one is Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies by Jared Diamond. I thought this was a very interesting historical study of how human beings developed from their hunter-gatherer way of life to evolve into the complex societies as we know them today. And this book opens up with the following line. This book attempts to provide a short history of everybody for the last 13,000 years. The question motivating this book is, why did history unfold differently on different continents? It focuses on how the natural environment and geographic locations have heavily influenced the progression from individual hunter-gatherer tribes to later develop agricultural farming, domestication of animals, language, diseases, and immunity, and technology such as weapons and other tools for production, and travel. I got a glimpse of a preview of the documentary that was created based off of this book. However, from my impression, I feel like the book is a lot more detailed and thorough in the information. The documentary seemed a little bit The book is much more rich in context, so I recommend checking it out. Like with all of the books here, I could go on forever with things that I liked about this one, but some of my favorite lines are, compared with hunter-gatherers, citizens of modern industrialized states enjoy better healthcare, lower risk of death by homicide, and longer lifespan, but receive much less social support from friendships and extended families. This was pulled from a section where the author was explaining how the term civilization is often associated with positive progress. However, he wanted to remind us here that everything also has its disadvantage, and we may be missing out on some important aspects of good quality life as well. Next, we have The Idea of the Brain by Matthew Cobb. I have no idea. It's an odd title if you ask me. It's a boring cover, one-worded reviews that don't help me understand what to expect in the book with a vague title. So I don't like this cover, and it didn't work for me. But I still had to flip through and kind of figure out what would I get myself involved in here. As you can see, I fell for the trap, purchased it, and read it through. It wasn't so bad. What I came to understand is this book was describing more of the function of the brain and how people came to understand its overall purpose in the system we have with our bodies. So for the longest time, as many of you may already know, people thought the emotions and thoughts were processed in the heart because heartbeats and pulses would increase when we were anxious or excited, and they saw more correlation in the reaction of the heart versus the brain, which was an organ that it was hard to study any reaction or activity at the time, especially with the lack of technology. The most interesting point I learned from reading this book was the emphasis on how we utilize metaphors and comparisons in order to study and understand something new, such as describing the heart as a pump for the blood and the brain as a computer to process and store our information and memories. Here are some lines that I thought was a good point. As the mid-20th century scientists who first drew the parallel between the brain and computer soon realized the brain is not digital. Even the simplest animal brain is not a computer like anything we have built, nor one we can yet envisage. The brain is not a computer, but it is more like a computer than it is like a clock, and by thinking about the parallels between a computer and a brain, we can gain insight into what is going on inside both our heads and those of animals. But, holding tightly to metaphors, we end up limiting what and how we think. Despite the tsunami of brain-related data being produced by laboratories around the world, we are in a crisis of ideas about what to do with all that data, about what it all means. I think that this reveals that the computer metaphor, which has served us so well for over half a century, may be reaching its limits. Personally here, I don't like the word crisis used in statements because it often makes me think of a negative situation that likely has no solution, a hopeless situation. That word is so often used, overused, and lost its effectiveness, and I don't think the author intends to describe our data for brain research is a hopeless situation. Science should be more optimistic in my opinion, otherwise, why even bother putting any effort into science at all? All matters in science should maintain its optimistic purpose of solving problems that it pursues, eventually, with time. Next I have The Ship of Dreams, The Sinking of the Titanic and the End of the Edwardian Era by Gareth. My obsession with the Titanic is becoming more and more apparent on this channel, and of course I had to pick up this book. It just felt natural to do so. So it turned out that this book was organized to revolve around a few selected and prominent individuals who were traveling on the Titanic. They include the Countess of Roths, Thomas Andrews, Isidore and Ida Strauss, Bruce Ismay, Jack Thayer, and Dorothy Gibson. Here are some of my favorite parts from this book. A difference in opinion should not lead to a rupture among friends or family. None of us is perfect, and we can always detect little shortcomings in others more quickly than we will recognize greater ones in ourselves. Difference of opinion will arise between thinking persons. Whoever may have been right should not exalt and taunt the other for having been wrong. The Countess of Roths, after her training as a Red Cross nurse, which encouraged her belief that to be useful was to be happy. This was taken from the moment the Carpathia ship rescued the survivors. The Carpathia was outbound to its destination, however, after picking up the survivors, they decided to turn back around to its original departure point. The captain of this ship was named Rostron, and it was credit of Rostron's passengers that none apparently objected to their trip being postponed by this return to their point of origin. The Carpathia's passengers behaved as beautifully as possible to the Titanic's survivors, offering up cabins and clothes. They were soon aided by some of the Titanic's surviving stewards who, although they were no longer technically employed, began looking after the passengers as though on our own ship. Sounds to me like a moment of where humanity is at its best. Next I have here is Practical Aviation and Aerospace Law by J. Scott Hamilton. Here I really appreciate the clear and simple title of this book. It's almost boring, but it very accurately summarized and set the expectations for it. Generally, we directly go over the federal aviation regulations, which we often use the FAR-AIM for as the main source of study for those. But this book explained aviation laws and expanded on how to navigate through options and decisions in the legal realm, practically, such as it discussed common violations made by pilots and how FAA enforcement is generally processed. It shares scenarios that could happen to any pilot, from medical exams to ramp checks to aircraft accidents and purchasing aircraft. I want to note that, although this title includes aerospace law as well, I did not find the book to be helpful in learning much about this area. There was only one chapter related to it, specifically about commercial spaceflight operations, and I felt this was my least favorite part of the entire book. mostly because instead of explaining how any of the information applied and related to the real world of spaceflight, it rather presented the topic by listing one item or fact after another. Additionally, the information listed in this chapter felt scattered and random and not cohesive to each other. So if you happen to be interested in aerospace law, I suggest avoiding this book as it's not a very significant resource on that topic. Next book I picked up was The Fords by Peter Collier and David Horowitz. This is another biography, but about multiple members and generations of the Ford family. Is that still called a biography? I'll say it's a multi-biography. This book begins with the life of Henry Ford himself, and I loved the part where it describes the time where he made and tested his first car, which is also described as a quadricycle. I thought this part not only illustrates the inspiring moment, but also captures a little bit of the adventurous character of Henry himself, and the community of people he was surrounded by. Check this out. The setting begins inside a backyard shed where Henry was building the vehicle. Although he was haggard from having gone 2 nights without sleep, Ford's recessed eyes flashed with excitement. His invention was finally ready for a test. But as he began to maneuver it toward the door, there was a revelation of the myopia everyone who knew him accepted as a paradoxical part of his visionary nature. The machine was too big to fit through the doors of the shop. Without hesitating, Ford seized a maul and began to knock out an opening in the brick walls. He drove around. The car eventually stopped, where he discovered that one of the igniters had failed. He repaired it and then drove back home that night. The next day, he drove out again in his new creation with his wife Clara and baby son. By the time they had returned from the harrowing trip over the cobblestone streets, their landlord, William Ford, was standing in front of the Bagley Avenue house, indignant at the damage that had been done to the backyard shed the night before. But after Henry showed him the horseless carriage and breathlessly explained its wonders, Ford was so completely won over that he not only rejected Ford's offer to repair the damaged brick, but insisted that the opening be widened to allow the quadricycle easy entry and exit. The rest of the week, Ford drove all through Detroit. Jim Bishop bicycled ahead of him as a flagman, stopping at saloons and stores to tell people to come out and hold their horses. One day, the little vehicle knocked a man down. By the time Ford had turned off the engine and climbed down, the victim lay on the ground, caught between the front and rear wheels. Ford leaned over and discussed the problem with him. Should he start the engine again and finish driving over him, or should he try to move the car? Finally, another man appeared and helped Ford pick up the quadricycle and move it off the prostrate man, who stood up, dusted himself off, accepted Ford's apologies, and walked off. Victim of the first recorded auto accident. Did he even have a clue? Seeing the strange little car coughing and wheezing along the narrow streets during the next few days, people would sometimes yell out the nickname his obsessive drive to build a horseless carriage had earned Ford, Crazy Henry. But whenever he stopped, crowds immediately surrounded his invention, examining it with such enthusiasm that he finally had to begin chaining it to the light posts for fear they would carry it off. Yes, crazy, he sometimes said, tapping his temple with a forefinger. Crazy like a fox. I think geese are crazy too, though. And lastly, I was learning something every day, and what I was learning was of use to myself and everybody else. Okay, last book in my list, but certainly not the least, Law and the Modern Mind by Jerome. This book is from the 1930s. You can tell from its condition. It's kind of falling apart everywhere all throughout. It was certainly crafted in a different way compared to how books are produced nowadays, and the pages are thicker, and if you look up close, each of the letters is pressed into the page, which is a nice little detail I liked looking at. Simply due to the age of this book, I started treating it more of an artifact and viewing it like a really special thing, and it is, but I debated if I'm gonna read it, can I still feel okay and justified to mark it up and highlight it, just like I do with all my other books? I debated, and you know what? I decided to just go for it. I did it, I marked it all up, and I made it mine. I think books are best and most beautiful when they are used, well read, and appreciated for their content and messages, so that's the way I decided to justify marking it all up. I thought this author was so talented in describing and explaining and very clearly articulating rather complicated and difficult ideas to express. It begins with a rather emotional situation. Here are some of my favorite parts. With society's negative, distrustful sentiment towards lawyers, which seems that view can still be observed today, Arnold Bennett denounces the lawyers as the most vicious opponents of social progress today. Ambassador Page wrote, "I sometimes wish that there were not a lawyer in this world." What lies back of this popular criticism? It appears to be founded on a belief that the lawyers complicate the law, and complicate it wantonly and unnecessarily, that if the legal profession did not interpose its craftiness and guile, the law could be clear, exact, and certain. The layman thinks that it would be possible so to revise the law books that they would become something like logarithm tables, that the lawyers could, only if they would, contrite some kind of legal slide rule for finding exact legal answers. But the law as we have it is uncertain, indefinite, subject to incalculable changes. This condition the public ascribes to the men of law. The average person considers either that lawyers are grossly negligent or that they are guilty of malpractice, venally obscuring simple legal truths in order to foment needless litigation, engaging in a guilt conspiracy of distortion and obfuscation in the interest of larger fees. Now it must be conceded that if the law can be made certain and invariable, the lawyers are grievously at fault. When human relationships are transforming daily, legal relationships cannot be expressed in enduring form. The constant development of unprecedented problems requires a legal system capable of fluidity and pliancy. Our society would be straitjacketed were not the courts, with the able assistance of the lawyers, constantly overhauling the law and adapting it to the realities of the ever-changing social, industrial, and political conditions. Although changes cannot be made lightly, yet law must be more or less impermanent, experimental, and therefore not nicely calculable. Much of the uncertainty of law is not an unfortunate accident. It is of immense social value. Again, I was really impressed and inspired by this author's talent and ability to make something like the subject of law sound like very relatable poetry. There's a lot more I could share from this book, but I will conclude with this last line. For, after all, rules are merely words, and those words can get into action only through decision. And that's it for the books. Till next time. I will now go over the spontaneous trip I made to Washington, D.C. because I want to talk about more random stuff. What should I even start with? As you saw previously in the intro of this video, this is the interior of the Library of Congress, and I like how the attention to detail is present everywhere from the ceiling to the floor, and overall I would just describe it as rather quite stunning. And I don't use that word often. There were quotes written throughout the building. This one says, "Give instruction unto those who cannot procure it for themselves." And by the way, thank you all so much for joining in on the project and supporting its growth, whether it's through liking, subscribing, or sharing your feedback on it. And so far, the main theme of the published content on here is those on written test questions. Though I plan to still continue helping where I can on those, we will be expanding on other areas of the project as well this year, which they're all shifting in priorities. I know it will be exciting, and a great deal will be learned from the experience. Even though, as much as I love being a student and continuously learning, there's a part of me that still loves being an instructor. This is the exterior of the Supreme Court, and I also really marveled at the beautiful, gorgeous details. This may be a scene that a lot of people recognize, and after reading the book Law and Modern Mind, I feel like I could already belong there. I just took these pictures of this hall with the steps because it was eerie looking, and I liked it. Still within the Supreme Court, there's this elegant spiral staircase. There was a plaque describing something special about this structure. I'm not sure what it was. I wasn't interested enough to read about it. I just liked looking at it, snapped a picture, and what intrigued me a little bit more on this one is the perspective felt a little bit off. Maybe it's just me, but it feels like some kind of scene you would see in a dream rather than in real life. Something looks a little bit twisted, don't you think? Or maybe it's just me. I think it's just me. Moving on to the botanical garden or the conservatory. I really like plants too, so I decided to pull out my camera and I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm a YouTuber now, I guess, so I'll show some exciting parts, and I don't know what on earth made me decide to turn the camera. Why would I do that? Why would I do that? I don't know. But you can see it's a pretty giant greenhouse with all kinds of gorgeous plants. I thought it was so beautiful. I love collecting plants, drawing plants, eating plants, smelling plants, growing them, everything. And can you guess what this tree is? Like, this tree decides to not grow the fruit on the branches like a normal tree. Like, what's so hard about that? But that's chocolate right there. Okay, I guess this tree can do whatever it wants. It owns us. I also visited the National Air and Space Museum. Do you like it? Not like it? Is it just me, or, well, does this look depressing or what? A museum sharing aviation and space? I would imagine a building design that represents inspiration and hope and look happy at least. Even the FAA lives in buildings that look more welcoming than this. This one feels like the exact opposite appearance to that of like the Library of Congress or Supreme Court. This place just reminds me of, like in those dark movies, those dark, ominous buildings where people just go to just die. But once you're inside, it's easy to forget what it looks like. And as to no one's surprise, there's just a bunch of airplane, aviation, and space stuff. Not much to say here at this point. I'll just let the pictures do most of the talking. By the way, my favorite pieces were all the exposed engines. I think they look really cool. This looks to be the Apollo mission simulator. I wonder how big the manual is to operate this. Maybe I don't want to know. This usually happens when I forget to bring an umbrella. That was the Library of Congress. There's the Supreme Court over there. I don't know what that building is. And then behind is the Capitol. Every time I saw this building featured in the background of some news channel, I always imagined it to be so much bigger than it really is. So when I saw it in person, I was kind of taken aback and surprised, like, hey, where's the real one? Well, this was a pleasant, relaxed video to make. My favorite videos to make so far are definitely the book review ones, but more work will be continued in the other sectors. So let's see how this new year will develop the project.